Given today's scripture reading, we might ask, what went wrong? What went wrong? Here was Jesus at the beginning of his ministry in his hometown of Nazareth, in the synagogue, on the Sabbath. He had just stood up and read from the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. As we heard in last Sunday's reading, God's restoration of the Jewish people was foretold and indeed underway. Good news to the poor, because resources of all will be pooled and shared with the whole community. Release to the captives, all who are repressed by political forces or forces of bad choices equaling sin. Recovery of sight to the blind, not only physical blindness, but spiritual opacity. Jesus read of the year of the Lord's favor, when debts are forgiven, slaves are freed, and land is restored to their rightful owners. Jesus was welcomed. He was welcomed home as a renowned rabbi, since positive reports from the surrounding countryside had preceded him. All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. And then, a mere 7 verses later in today's scripture, his listeners got up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. So, what happened? Now, while the listeners were amazed by his delivery, they did pose the question, is this not Joseph's son? Did they say, is this not Joseph's son? In awe. Or, is this not Joseph's son? With skepticism. Whether it is one way or the other, the point is, Jesus was misidentified. He grew up in Joseph's house, but he is the Son of God. And so we have the first and ultimately crucial misunderstanding of who Jesus is: the Lord incarnate, the Son of God. And so Jesus responds to his listeners by saying, doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, "Doctor, cure yourself." In the vernacular, doubtless you will say, if you're so great, let's see some proof. For the people in the synagogue that day, they wanted a tangible demonstration of Jesus' power. They had already heard of the great feats he had performed in Capernaum. So why not a miracle or two for the hometown? Now, that would have been the easier route for Jesus to take. A miracle, right then and there. All of Nazareth would become Jesus' followers, and there would have been no trip with an angry mob to the brow of a cliff, and only a short time later, no trip with an angry mob to the foot of the cross. Jesus never took the easy way. Just prior to the beginning of his ministry in Nazareth, he had come out of a period of deep reflection, discernment, and temptation. that period of time spent in the wilderness. The tempter, that compelling voice that calls us to make bad choices, also known as the devil, said to Jesus, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from this pinnacle, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you to protect you." And Jesus answered, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." So Jesus chose once again not to put the power of the Lord to the test, and chose instead to demonstrate the inclusivity of the kingdom of God by reminding the Jews of their history. And so Jesus took two stories that all the listeners would already know concerning the miraculous deeds of the prophets Elijah and Elisha, some 800 years prior to Jesus' ministry, who by the power of God brought blessing not to the Jews, but the Gentiles. His first story relates a time of severe drought throughout the land, and God sent Elijah to a widow in Zarephath, a place belonging not to Israel, but to the land of Sidon. And there, when the widow made a cake of her last bit of meal and her last bit of oil and shared it with Elijah as he instructed her, thinking in the final food that she and her son would eat and then die of starvation, by the power of God, the meal and the oil last until the famine lifts. And then Jesus said to his listeners in the synagogue that day, "But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel at the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months. And there was severe famine all over the land, yet Elijah was sent to none of them except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon." Unspoken but clearly understood was, you know, those folks in Sidon that you all don't like. Jesus followed this story up with another about the prophet Elijah, who God sent to cure a case of leprosy in a man called Naaman, a general in the Syrian army. Now the Syrians were sworn enemies of the Jews. And Jesus said, "There were also many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman, the Syrian." This second story was enough to set his listeners off in a rage, and they drove him out of town to the edge of a cliff. But still, why should this message of God's inclusivity rile people up so much? There might have been several things going on that day. First of all, Nazareth, described as an insignificant agricultural village with a population of around 1,600 people, was welcoming back a hometown hero in the person of Jesus. The people in the synagogue could bask in the reflected glory of a recognized eminent rabbi, one of them. A good feeling. Not unlike when our IU basketball team prevails, bringing glory to us all, and as some woman in the congregation said, "Go Hoosiers." And furthermore, Jesus had just read the words of the prophet Isaiah. And now all those good things, an end to poverty, release from oppression and debt and slavery and healing, were all coming their way. Finally, at last, for sure, coming their way, because they were the chosen people of God. And on top of all of that, they would be championed by none other than Jesus, their hometown rabbi. What a come down, then, to hear from Jesus that there were no guaranteed miracles for their community of Nazareth, or even for the land of Israel. As a matter of fact, God might choose to bless their enemies over them. Indeed, a bitter pill. But perhaps even more than that, Jesus held a mirror up to the Jews who were gathered that day. Self-reflection is hard. Self-reflection is painful. After settling into a way of thinking and a set of expectations, to reflect and admit, maybe I missed something. To reflect and think, is there another way to look at this situation? To reflect and say, oh, I hadn't thought of that. To stop and say, I could have it wrong. Very difficult. Easier to don the mantle of righteous indignation. Easier to be outraged. And that is a path that the worshipers took that day as they drove Jesus out of the synagogue and onto that cliff. In this passage today, I can relate more with the members of the synagogue than I can with the actions of Jesus. Jesus made a decision to speak the truth regardless of the consequences, certainly a choice that I aspire to. But based on Jesus' message of inclusivity and the nature of the kingdom of God, where all are included and loved and valued, what can I take away in light of the way the members of the synagogue reacted? A choice that I don't aspire to. A first step might be to let go of the idea that my view of the world and my perspective is accurate, and everyone else's is close to right at best and outright wrong at worst. Here were the members of the synagogue, law-abiding and devout, and thereby sure that they had a lock on God's blessing above all others. They were and had always been the chosen people, God's favorites. Jesus' message made it clear that blessing, defined as God's favor and protection, is for all people, not just one specific group with one specific set of beliefs. Next, we were reminded through Jesus' choice of illustrations that God's blessing will not and cannot be orchestrated, and therefore will likely be given to a person or a group that may not seem a bit deserving from one's personal perspective. God's blessing may be given to those we see as our enemies. And finally, Jesus in his teaching in the synagogue in Nazareth called on those worshipers, and now us, to open our minds to new ways of seeing how God's grace works in the world, to self-reflect, to be open to perspectives other than our own, summed up in the words of God to Abraham, "You shall be a blessing." A call for us to offer favor and protection to others, not so that favor and protection will be ours, not because they will be ours in turn, but because showing favor to others is a part of our covenant with God. How many times have we been in relationships with our partners or members of our family and believed that we were all on the same page until a disagreement came to light? How much easier it is to dig in our heels and cling to our own perspectives and cast ourselves in the right and the other in the wrong. How many times in the workplace have we felt slighted or treated unfairly and have stoked those feelings of anger and outrage rather than entertain an act of self-reflection or understanding of another perspective or an act of forgiveness? How much easier to be an adversary than a blessing. How much easier to be exclusive than inclusive. But when we allow ourselves to indulge in narrow-minded, self-righteous behavior, we are in fact joining in with those who would run Jesus off a cliff. Jesus did not lose his life that day in Nazareth. He passed through the midst of them and went on his way. There were others in Galilee with whom he wanted to share the good news of the kingdom of God. And so may we have the strength to do likewise, to keep moving forward into each new day, to be a blessing to all we encounter, and thereby demonstrate and engage in the good news of God's kingdom each and every day. Amen.